The conference room aboard the Imperial flagship Dominion of Stars was silent, except for the low hum of the ship's engines. Emperor Jathik sat on his raised throne, his four eyes scanning the holographic display that floated before him. The display showed a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in the outer reaches of the galaxy. "This is the world?" the Emperor asked, his voice carrying the weight of 12,000 years of unbroken rule. "Yes, Divine Emperor," replied Admiral Kravis, bowing low. "The natives call it Earth. Our scouts have confirmed it is a Class 7 primitive world. They have barely left their own atmosphere. Their weapons are crude chemical explosives and basic fission devices. They pose no threat to the Empire." Jathik leaned forward, studying the images of the planet's inhabitants. Bipedal creatures with only 2 eyes and no natural armor. They looked weak, fragile even. And their population? Approximately 8 billion, Divine Emperor. They are divided into hundreds of competing tribal groups. They cannot even unite their own world, much less pose any resistance to Imperial forces. The Emperor nodded slowly. This was routine. The Valorian Empire had expanded across 40,000 worlds using the same method. Find a primitive species, break them quickly, harvest the survivors for labor. The Empire needed workers for its vast mining operations, and these humans would serve adequately. "Begin standard protocol," Jathik ordered. "Bombardment of major population centers, followed by ground operations to secure survivors. I want this completed within 1 standard cycle." "As you command, Divine Emperor." The Valorian fleet emerged from hyperspace above Earth on a Tuesday morning. There were 50 dreadnoughts, each 5 kilometers long and bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. Earth's primitive detection systems noticed them immediately, and within minutes, every news channel on the planet was broadcasting images of the massive ships hanging in orbit like dark moons. Humanity tried to communicate. Radio signals in hundreds of languages were sent toward the ships. Messages of peace, offers of cooperation, pleas for mercy. The Valorian fleet did not respond. They had their orders. The first plasma lance struck New York City at 9:47 a.m. Eastern Time. The beam of superheated matter carved through the atmosphere in a fraction of a second and struck the heart of Manhattan. The entire island vaporized instantly. The shockwave that followed flattened everything for 50 kilometers in every direction. 8 million people died before they could even understand what was happening. Beijing was next. Then Moscow, Tokyo, London, Paris, Delhi, Los Angeles. The bombardment was methodical and precise. Every major city on Earth received the same treatment. The Valorian weapons were designed to create maximum destruction with minimum effort. Within 6 hours, every population center with more than 1 million inhabitants had been reduced to smoking craters. Earth's militaries tried to fight back. Fighter jets launched missiles at the orbiting ships. Nuclear weapons were fired from submarines and underground silos. Every weapon humanity had created in its violent history was thrown at the invaders. None of it mattered. The Valorian shields absorbed the attacks without even flickering. The primitive weapons of Earth were like stones thrown against a mountain. Ground forces landed on the 3rd day. Valorian soldiers, 8 feet tall and armored in powered suits, swept across the continents. Human soldiers who tried to resist were cut down by energy weapons that left nothing but ash. Cities that had survived the orbital bombardment were cleared building by building. The orders were clear: kill those who resist, capture those who surrender. In underground bunkers, world leaders watched their civilization collapse. President Margaret Foster of the United States sat in her command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, staring at screens that showed the end of everything. Her generals had no solutions. Her scientists had no answers. Earth's most advanced weapons were toys compared to what the invaders possessed. "How long do we have?" she asked her chief military advisor. General Chen looked at the tactical displays and swallowed hard. "At their current pace, Madam President, organized resistance will be impossible within 48 hours. They're herding survivors into processing centers. We don't know what happens there, but intelligence suggests they're sorting people for some kind of labor system. So we're going to be slaves," Foster said quietly. "It appears so, ma'am." Foster thought about giving the order to detonate every remaining nuclear weapon, to make Earth worthless to the invaders even if it meant killing every remaining human. But she looked at the images of families being marched into the processing centers, children clinging to their parents, and she could not give that order. As long as humans lived, there was hope. Even as slaves, they would live, Order all remaining forces to stand down, she said. Tell our people to cooperate. We survive first. Everything else comes later. The Valorian occupation was swift and efficient. They established automated facilities across every continent to manage the human survivors. The processing was simple. Humans were scanned, cataloged, and assigned identification numbers. Families were kept together when possible, but only because it made the humans more compliant. Those with technical skills were marked for training. The rest were designated for general labor. In one of the processing facilities, Dr. Sarah Chen stood in line with her 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Sarah was an engineer who had worked on spacecraft design before the invasion. Now she was prisoner number 7034 5-12. Emma clutched her mother's hand tightly, too frightened to cry. A Valorian overseer, a being that looked like a cross between an insect and a reptile, scanned Sarah with a handheld device. This one has technical knowledge, the overseer announced in translated speech. Mark for advanced training. Sarah was separated from the general population and taken to a different section of the facility. Emma screamed and reached for her mother, but guards held the girl back. Sarah fought to reach her daughter, but human strength was nothing against Valorian technology. The last thing Sarah saw before being led away was Emma's terrified face. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and thousands of other humans with technical backgrounds were taught to maintain Valorian equipment. The technology was beyond anything Earth had created, but the principles were similar enough. Sarah learned quickly, as did the others. They had to. Failure meant punishment or death. But while Sarah learned to repair Valorian machines, she also learned something else. She learned how the machines worked. She memorized every circuit, every power flow, every weakness in the design. When the Valorian instructors were not watching, she shared what she learned with other humans. They did not know what they would do with this knowledge, but instinct told them to gather it anyway. On the 40th day after the invasion began, a Valorian scientist named Varek submitted a report to his superiors. He had been studying human biology and had discovered something disturbing. Human brains form new neural pathways at a rate far exceeding any known species. They adapted to new information with frightening speed. They learned languages in weeks that took other species years. Most concerning, they seemed capable of creative problem-solving in ways that the Valorian AI could not predict. Varek's report concluded with a recommendation: complete extermination of the human species. They were too dangerous to be allowed to survive even as slaves. The report was filed and forgotten. The Valorian Empire had broken thousands of species over 12,000 years. What possible threat could primitives pose? In her cell that night, Sarah Chen held a small piece of circuit board she had stolen from the repair facility. It was nothing really, just a component she had palmed during training, but it represented something important. It represented the beginning of knowledge. It represented resistance, however small. She would survive. Humanity would survive. And someday, somehow, there would be a reckoning. Outside Earth's atmosphere, the Valorian fleet prepared to depart. The occupation forces were in place. The survivors were processed, and the planet was now just another asset in the Empire's vast holdings. Processing Colony XR-771 would supply workers for the mining operations in nearby systems. In a few generations, these humans would not even remember their homeworld had once been free. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving Earth behind in the darkness. They had already forgotten about the small blue planet, but the humans would not forget. They would never forget. 50 years had passed since the Valorian fleet had burned Earth's cities and enslaved its people. 2 generations of humans had been born into captivity, spread across 200 worlds as laborers in the vast Valorian Empire. To any observer, humans appeared to be model slaves. They worked efficiently, rarely caused trouble, and seemed to have accepted their place in the imperial order. The Valorians congratulated themselves on another successful integration of a primitive species. Human workers were actually quite valuable. They learned quickly, adapted to new tasks with surprising speed, and were capable of creative solutions to technical problems. Within 30 years, humans had become the preferred workforce for maintaining complex machinery across the Empire. They were trusted with increasingly sophisticated systems because they were simply better at the work than most other species. What the Valorians did not realize was that every human worker was gathering intelligence. Every technical manual was memorized. Every security protocol was noted. Every weakness in Valorian technology was cataloged and quietly shared through networks that the Empire never detected. Humans had learned to communicate in ways their masters could not monitor. A gesture here, a pattern in their work there, messages hidden in plain sight. On Earth, in bunkers the Valorians had never found, a resistance had been growing. The automated occupation systems assumed that humans who disappeared from the processing centers had simply died. In reality, thousands had escaped into underground facilities that had survived the bombardment. These facilities had been expanded over 5 decades, dug deeper and hidden better, powered by geothermal energy that left no trace for orbital sensors. Dr. Sarah Chen was now 73 years old. Her daughter Emma, taken from her that terrible day 50 years ago, was somewhere in the Empire, assigned to a factory world producing components for Valorian ships. Sarah had not seen her daughter in 5 decades, but she lived for the hope of finding her again. That hope drove everything she did. Sarah stood in the central command center of the Resistance, deep beneath what had once been the ruins of Denver. Around her, 50 of Earth's brightest minds worked at stations cobbled together from stolen Valorian technology. The room looked like something from a science fiction film, except all of it was real and functional. "We've completed the analysis of the fleet control systems," reported Dr. James Okonkwo, a young man born in captivity, who had become one of humanity's best tactical minds. The Valorians centralized everything after their last major war 8,000 years ago. Every ship in their fleet connects to a networked command system. "Why would they do that?" asked Maria Santos, the Resistance's chief engineer. "That creates a single point of failure." "Because they've never needed to worry about it," Sarah replied. "They've been the dominant power for so long that they've optimized for efficiency rather than security. They've never faced an enemy capable of exploiting their systems." James brought up a holographic display showing the architecture of the Valorian fleet network. "Our people have been working on their systems for 50 years. We've identified 17 critical nodes that control fleet operations across entire sectors. If we could compromise these nodes simultaneously, we could create chaos across their military." "Can we do it?" Sarah asked. "We can," James said. "But we need more time. We're building backdoors into their systems through the maintenance work our people do. But it has to be subtle. If they detect what we're doing before we're ready, they'll purge the systems and we'll lose everything." Sarah nodded. Patience had been humanity's greatest weapon. They had learned to think in terms of decades rather than days. "Continue the work." "How are we progressing on the fleet construction?" Maria pulled up another display. "We now have 37 shipyards operating in secret. They're scattered across abandoned systems hidden in asteroid fields and nebulae. We've been stealing components piece by piece from Valorian facilities for decades. Each shipyard produces approximately 1 ship per year. We currently have 2,812 vessels complete and ready for crew." The number sounded impressive until you compared it to the Valorian fleet. The Empire had over 100,000 warships. Humanity's secret fleet was outnumbered more than 30 to 1. And that was if they could actually crew all their ships. The human population was scattered and controlled. Getting enough people together to operate a fleet would be nearly impossible. "It's not enough," said General Marcus Torres, the Resistance's military commander. "Even if we achieve surprise, even if our systems attacks work perfectly, we can't win a straight fight against the Empire. Their technology is too advanced and they have too many ships." "We don't need to win a straight fight," Sarah said. "We need to break their confidence. The Valorian Empire has not faced a serious military threat in 8,000 years. Their tactics are rigid, their officers are complacent, and their entire military culture is built on the assumption of absolute superiority. We make them doubt that assumption and the Empire will start to fracture." "How?" Marcus asked. Sarah smiled, though there was no joy in it. "We've been inside their systems for 50 years. We've been the trusted servants, the reliable workers, the species that accepted its place. We know how they think, how they operate, how they make decisions. They know nothing about us except what we've chosen to show them. That's our advantage." James understood what she meant. "We're not trying to defeat their fleet. We're trying to defeat their belief that they can't be defeated." "Exactly. The Valorians crushed Earth because we were divided and primitive. But we've learned from them. We've studied their technology, their tactics, their weaknesses, and we've done something they've never seen a conquered species do." "What's that?" Maria asked. "We've unified," Sarah said. "Every human in the galaxy, whether they were born on Earth or born in captivity, shares the same goal. We're not a planet anymore. We're a species. And we're ready to remind the galaxy what humans are capable of when we work together. The preparation continued in secret. Human workers across the Empire continued their subtle sabotage. Not enough to be noticed, just small changes to make systems more networked, more centralized, more dependent on automated controls. They earned trust by being excellent workers. They rose through the ranks of the technical services. They became indispensable. On a factory world called Thraxis 7, Emma Chen worked as a senior engineer in a facility that produced power cores for Valorian battleships. She was 48 years old and had spent her entire life in captivity. She barely remembered her mother's face, but she remembered the terror of being torn from her arms. That memory kept her focused on her work. Emma supervised a team of 200 human workers. The Valorian overseers trusted her completely because she had never caused any problems. She was efficient, competent, and reliable. What the overseers did not know was that Emma had been modifying the power cores for 20 years. The changes were microscopic, undetectable by standard inspection. But they were there. Every power core that left Emma's facility contained a tiny flaw, a weakness in the containment field that would only activate when it received a specific quantum signal. The flaw would not destroy the ship immediately. Instead, it would cause the power core to become unstable, forcing the ship to shut down its main systems to prevent a catastrophic failure. Emma had modified over 60,000 power cores. Those cores were now installed in ships throughout the Valorian fleet. Emma did not know if her sabotage would ever matter. She did not know if the resistance on Earth even existed anymore, but she did the work anyway because it gave her purpose. Somewhere in the galaxy, other humans were doing similar work, small acts of resistance that might never amount to anything, or might change everything. On Earth, Sarah Chen stood in front of a holographic display showing the current positions of human workers across the Empire. There were 30 million humans spread across 200 worlds. Most did not know about the resistance. Most believed they were simply surviving as best they could. But a network of 10,000 resistance members occupied key positions throughout the Empire. They were mechanics, engineers, technicians, and programmers. They maintained the systems that kept the Empire running, and they were ready. "It's time," Sarah said to her command staff. "We've prepared for 50 years. We've built our fleet, compromised their systems, and positioned our people. If we wait any longer, we risk discovery." "Are you sure?" James asked. "Once we start this, there's no going back. The Valorians will try to exterminate us completely." "They tried that 50 years ago," Sarah replied. "This time we'll be ready. Send the signal to all resistance cells. Operation Liberation begins in 30 days. The message went out through channels the Valorians could not detect. Across 200 worlds, humans received the same simple message. Remember Terra. Prepare to rise. 30 days until humanity reminds the galaxy what we are." In her quarters that night, Sarah looked at the only photograph she had of Emma, taken just days before the invasion. Her daughter had been 8 years old, smiling at the camera, completely unaware of the horror that was coming. Sarah whispered to the photograph, "I'm coming for you, baby. All of us are coming. And this time we're not the ones who will be afraid." The signal reached every human in the galaxy at exactly the same moment. It was a simple quantum-encoded message that bypassed all Valorian monitoring systems. 3 words appeared in the minds of 30 million humans, transmitted through neural implants that the Resistance had secretly installed over decades. Remember Terra. Rise on Processing Colony XR771. What had once been Earth, the uprising began at dawn. The Valorian garrison commander was drinking his morning stimulant when the automated defense turret suddenly rotated and opened fire on his facility. He died before he could understand what was happening. All across the planet, defense systems that humans had maintained for 50 years turned on their Valorian operators. Sarah Chen stood in the central command bunker, watching screens that showed simultaneous uprisings on 200 worlds. This was the moment they had worked toward for half a century. Everything depended on the next few hours. "All stations reporting activation," James Okonkwo said, his hands moving across holographic controls. "The back doors are working. We have control of automated systems on 147 worlds. The others are encountering more resistance, but they're fighting through." "What about the fleet?" Sarah asked. "Our ships are moving into position now. replied Admiral Marcus Torres, who now commanded humanity's secret navy. "We're detecting confusion in the Valorian fleet network. The compromised power cores are activating on schedule. Approximately 40,000 Valorian ships are experiencing power fluctuations." Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Emma's work and the work of thousands like her was paying off. 40,000 ships would not be destroyed, but they would be vulnerable. That was all humanity needed. On the factory world of Thoraxis 7, Emma Chen received the signal and immediately activated the emergency protocols she had prepared. She turned to her team of 200 human workers and spoke calmly. "It's time. Everyone knows their assignments. We control the power grid for this entire facility. On my mark, we shut down every Valorian system and activate the weapons we've hidden. We secure the starport and wait for extraction. Any questions?" There were none. Every person in that room had been born into slavery. Every one of them had lost family to Valorian cruelty. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. "Execute," Emma commanded. The factory complex went dark. Emergency lights flickered on, but they illuminated a facility that had already changed. Humans emerged from concealed positions carrying weapons they had assembled piece by piece over decades. The Valorian overseers, suddenly finding themselves in darkness and surrounded by armed slaves they had thought were docile, barely had time to react before they were overwhelmed. Emma led her team to the starport, where they found transport ships that would carry them off this world. Similar operations were happening across the Empire. It was not a perfect operation. Many humans would die. But for the first time in 50 years, they were fighting back. In the Valorian capital system of Valorius Prime, Emperor Jathic received reports that made no sense. Slave uprisings were happening simultaneously across 200 worlds. Automated systems were malfunctioning throughout the fleet. Thousands of ships were reporting power failures. And most impossible of all, an unknown fleet had appeared on long-range sensors, heading directly toward the capital system. "How many ships?" the Emperor demanded. "Approximately 3,000, Divine Emperor," reported his chief military advisor. "They're using Valorian drive signatures, but we have no record of these vessels in our fleet database." "Pirates? Rebels from one of the border systems?" "No, Divine Emperor. We're receiving identification signals from the fleet. They're broadcasting in a primitive language our translators identify as English. The message says, 'You taught us to serve. We learned to destroy instead.' Divine Emperor, they're humans." Jathic stared at the display in disbelief. The humans were primitive slaves. They had been broken 50 years ago. How could they possibly have built a fleet? How could they have hidden it? How could they be coordinating uprisings across the entire empire? "Deploy the home fleet," the Emperor ordered. "I want those human ships obliterated. All of them. And send extermination orders to every world with a human population. If we cannot control them, we will erase them from existence." The Valorian home fleet was the most powerful military formation in the galaxy. 20,000 ships guarded the capital system, ready to respond to any threat. They had not fought a real battle in 8,000 years, but their technology was superior and their numbers were overwhelming. 3,000 human ships would not be enough. Admiral Marcus Torres stood on the bridge of the human flagship Remembrance, watching as the Valorian fleet moved to intercept. He was a man born in captivity, who had never seen Earth before it was destroyed, but he carried the memory of what had been lost. Every human in his fleet carried that same memory. "All ships, this is Torres. We're outnumbered 7-1. Our technology is stolen and jury-rigged. By every logical measure, we should lose this battle. But logic is not humanity's strength. Our strength is in adapting and thinking creatively, in doing what the enemy does not expect. The Valorians fight by the book. We're going to throw that book away. All ships execute attack pattern chaos." The human fleet did not behave like any military formation the Valorians had ever encountered. Instead of forming defensive lines and advancing in coordinated groups, the human ships scattered in seemingly random directions. Some accelerated to maximum speed, others decelerated suddenly. Some flew in tight spirals, others in wide arcs. To the Valorian AI controlling the home fleet, it looked like madness. It was not madness. It was human creativity applied to warfare. Every ship captain had been given general objectives but complete freedom in how to achieve them. There was no predictable pattern for the Valorian computers to analyze. Every ship moved independently, exploiting gaps in the Valorian formation that appeared and disappeared in seconds. The Valorian fleet fired massed volleys at where the human ships should have been, but the humans were never where the targeting computers predicted. Meanwhile, human ships darted in close, too close for the Valorian formation to adjust. They targeted specific systems with weapons designed by human engineers who understood the Valorian designs better than the Valorians themselves. Then, the real attack began. James Okonkwo, coordinating the cyber warfare from Earth, activated the backdoors that had been planted over 50 years. Suddenly, Valorian ships began reporting system failures. Shields dropped unexpectedly. Weapons targeting computers gave false readings. Communication systems jammed. The power cores that Emma and thousands like her had modified began to fail, forcing ships to shut down main systems. The Valorian fleet was tearing itself apart, trying to compensate for systems that were no longer trustworthy. Ships collided with each other as navigation computers gave incorrect data. Weapons fired on friendly vessels due to identification system failures. The perfect automated coordination that had made the Valorian fleet invincible became a liability when the systems themselves were compromised. Human ships pressed the advantage. They moved through the chaos like predators, striking at disabled vessels and then disappearing before the Valorians could respond. It was not a fair fight. It was not an honorable battle. It was humanity using every dirty trick they had learned in 50 years of slavery. 6 hours into the battle, the Valorian home fleet was crippled. Half their ships were disabled or destroyed. The survivors were scattered and unable to coordinate. The humans had lost 800 ships, but they had won. They had actually won, Admiral Torres broadcast on all channels, knowing the Emperor himself was listening. Emperor Jathik, we could finish this now. We could burn your homeworld like you burned ours. We could make you feel the terror that 8 billion humans felt 50 years ago. But we want you to understand something first. Torres paused, choosing his words carefully. We're not here for conquest. We're not here to build our own empire. We're here for one reason only, to make sure that what you did to us never happens to anyone else. We're here to show you that the universe is not yours to dominate. We're here to prove that even the smallest, weakest species can rise up when pushed far enough. He leaned closer to the camera, his voice hard as steel. You made a mistake 50 years ago, Emperor. You thought that because you broke our civilization, you broke our spirit. You thought that because we served you, we had accepted our place. You were wrong. We served you because we were learning. We were patient because we were planning. And now we're here to collect payment for every human child you took from their parents, for every city you burned, for every life you destroyed. Surrender your forces and face justice, Torres continued, or force us to become the monsters you tried to make us. Your choice, Emperor, but choose quickly. Every minute you delay, more of your ships fall. And every minute you delay, more of your subject species see that the mighty Valorian Empire can bleed. On 200 worlds, humans watched the broadcast with tears streaming down their faces. Emma Chen, now evacuated from Thoraxis 7 and aboard a rescue ship, saw Admiral Torres's message and whispered a prayer. For her mother, whom she had not seen in 50 years, for all the humans who had died in the camps. News of the Battle of Valorius Prime spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Within days, every world in the Empire had seen the recordings of humanity's impossible victory. The footage showed Valorian ships, supposedly invincible, burning in space while human vessels darted between them like hunters taking down a great beast. The mighty Emperor's home fleet, broken by escaped slaves. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic for the Empire. On Keltar 9, a mining world where the native Keltari had been enslaved for 3,000 years, the workers rose up and seized control of the planetary defense systems. On Draxus Prime, an industrial world operated by the insectoid Drax, the laborers overwhelmed their Valorian overseers and declared independence. Within a week of humanity's victory, 30 subject species launched their own rebellions. Emperor Jathik watched his empire crumble from his throne room, his 4 eyes fixed on reports that grew worse by the hour. His advisors argued among themselves, trying to develop a response to a situation they had never imagined possible. The Empire's military was designed to intimidate and crush primitives, not fight a sophisticated enemy on 400 fronts simultaneously. Silence, the Emperor commanded, and the room fell quiet. There is only one solution. We cannot control the humans, and their example is poisoning every enslaved species in the Empire. Therefore, we exterminate them completely. Every human on every world must die. When the other species see what happens to those who rebel, they will remember their place. Admiral Kravas, who had overseen the initial conquest of Earth, stepped forward. "Divine Emperor, our fleet is scattered across the galaxy trying to contain the rebellions. If we concentrate forces to exterminate the human populations, the other uprisings will spread unchecked. Then we sacrifice those worlds," Jothic said coldly. "Let the primitives have them. Without the humans to inspire them, they will fall back into chaos and infighting. But if we allow humanity to survive, if we show weakness, the Empire will collapse completely. Send extermination fleets to every world with a significant human presence. I want them wiped out within 30 days. The orders went out across the Imperial communication network. 60 Valorian battle groups were redirected from anti-rebellion operations and sent to exterminate human populations. Each battle group consisted of 200 warships and carried enough firepower to sterilize a planet's surface. The Valorians had used this tactic before on species that proved too troublesome to control. It had always worked. Sarah Chen received intelligence about the extermination orders within hours. The Resistance had infiltrated the Valorian communication system so thoroughly that they often knew about Imperial decisions before the field commanders did. She stood in the command center on Earth, surrounded by her staff, and studied the projected fleet movements. "They're sending extermination fleets to 40 worlds with major human populations," James Okonkwo reported. "Each fleet is strong enough to overwhelm any local defenses. If those fleets reach their targets, we'll lose millions of our people." "They won't reach their targets," Sarah said calmly. "This is exactly what we expected. Marcus, are our forces in position?" Admiral Torres nodded. "We've been preparing for this since the Battle of Valorius Prime. Our fleet is dispersed across the likely approach routes. But Sarah, we're still outnumbered. Each of those Valorian battle groups has 200 ships. We have 3,000 total and they're scattered. We don't fight them head-on," Sarah replied. "We've taught the other species how to fight. The Keltari rebellion on Keltar 9, we armed them and trained their fighters. The Drax uprising on Draxus Prime, we've been smuggling weapons to them for years. Every species that's rebelling right now has human advisors teaching them Valorian tactics and weaknesses." She pulled up a tactical display showing the locations of the various rebellions. When the Valorian extermination fleets pass through these systems on their way to target human worlds, they're going to run into ambushes. Not just human forces, but coalitions of freed species working together. The Valorians expect to fight primitives. They're going to face organized military resistance using their own tactics against them. On the mining world of Keltar 9, the Keltari defense forces watched their sensors as a Valorian battle group dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of their system. The Keltari were a warrior species who had been conquered 200 years after humanity. They had never forgotten how to fight, but they had lacked the weapons and coordination to resist effectively. Until the humans had taught them. Commander Velkara, leader of the Keltari defense fleet, stood on the bridge of her flagship and studied the approaching Valorian ships. Her fleet consisted of 70 vessels, salvaged Valorian ships that had been captured during the initial uprising. She was outnumbered 3-1, but she had advantages the Valorians did not expect. Standing beside her was Lieutenant David Park, a human technical advisor who had spent the last month teaching the Keltari how to fight like humans. "Remember the briefing," David said. "The Valorians will expect you to either flee or form a defensive line. Do neither. Scatter your ships and attack from multiple vectors simultaneously. Keep them confused and unable to coordinate." "We know the plan, human," Velkara said, but there was no hostility in her voice. The humans had earned respect through their actions. "All ships engage attack pattern Delta. Show these Imperial fools that Keltar 9 is not helpless." The Keltari fleet executed the human-designed tactics perfectly. Ships scattered in multiple directions, forcing the Valorian formation to split to pursue them. Then, when the Valorian ships were spread thin, the Keltari vessels turned and attacked in coordinated wolf packs. 3 or 4 ships targeting a single Valorian vessel and overwhelming its defenses before moving to the next target. The Valorian commander was stunned. These were primitives, recently conquered using salvaged ships. They should not be capable of this level of coordination. But every tactic they used, every maneuver they executed, was designed to exploit weaknesses in Valorian military doctrine. It was as if they knew exactly how the Valorian fleet would respond. They did know, because humans had been studying Valorian tactics for 50 years, and now they were sharing that knowledge with every species willing to fight. The Battle of Keltar 9 lasted 4 hours. When it ended, The Valorian battle group was destroyed, and the Keltari had lost 30 ships. It was a costly victory, but it was a victory, and it was happening across dozens of systems simultaneously. Emperor Jathic received the reports of his extermination fleets being destroyed, and felt something he had not experienced in his entire reign. Fear. The Empire was not just losing battles, it was losing the war. The humans had not just defeated the Valorian military, they had broken the myth of Valorian invincibility. How many of the extermination fleets reached their targets? He demanded. 3, Divine Emperor, his military advisor replied quietly. 3 out of 60. The others were intercepted by coalition forces. Human ships supported by freed species all working together. Divine Emperor, we are losing this war. That is unacceptable, Jathic hissed. We are the Valorian Empire. We have ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. We cannot be defeated by slaves and primitives. Divine Emperor, perhaps we should consider negotiations. The human leadership has not demanded our extermination. They speak of justice and accountability. If we offer to surrender and face trial for our actions, we might preserve the Valorian homeworlds and avoid total destruction. Jathic's claws scraped against the arms of his throne. Surrender, trial, accountability. These were words that had never been applied to a Valorian emperor. But as he looked at the strategic displays showing his empire in flames, he understood that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Open a channel to the human leadership, he said, each word like poison on his tongue. I will negotiate terms. The message reached Sarah Chen's command center within the hour. The mighty emperor of the Valorian Empire, ruler of 40,000 worlds, was asking for terms. Sarah read the message and felt tears on her cheeks. Not tears of joy, but tears of exhaustion. 50 years of planning, of sacrifice, of losing people she loved to the long struggle. And it had led to this moment. What do we tell him? James asked. Sarah wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. We tell him the truth. We didn't fight this war for revenge. We fought it so no species would ever suffer what we suffered. We tell him that the Valorian Empire is finished, but the Valorian people don't have to be. Justice, not genocide. Accountability, not extermination. That's what we offer. And if he refuses? Sarah's expression hardened. Then we finish what we started. We've shown the galaxy we can destroy the Empire's military. If necessary, we'll show them we can destroy their worlds too. But I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope Jathic is smart enough to choose life over pride. The reply was transmitted to Valorius Prime. The Emperor read it and understood that he had no choice. The humans had won. The only question now was whether the Valorian species would survive to see what came next. In her quarters, Emma Chen held a communication device that had delivered a message she had waited 50 years to receive. A simple text message, Emma, it's Mom. I'm alive. We're coming for you. The Galactic Tribunal convened on a neutral world called Haven, a planet that had never been part of the Valorian Empire. Representatives from 200 species filled the massive chamber, all watching as Emperor Jathic was led to the center platform in restraints. For the first time in 12,000 years, a Valorian ruler would face judgment for his actions. Sarah Chen sat in the human delegation section, with Emma beside her. Mother and daughter had been reunited 3 months ago, when the war finally ended with the Empire's complete surrender. The reunion had been tearful and bittersweet. They had lost 50 years that could never be recovered. Emma's entire childhood had been stolen by the Empire, but they were together now, and that was what mattered. The lead magistrate, a being from a species that had remained neutral throughout the war, called the tribunal to order. Emperor Jathic of the Valorian Empire, you stand accused of genocide, crimes against sapient species, and the enslavement of billions across 40,000 worlds. How do you answer these charges? Jathic stood silent for a long moment. Finally he spoke. I answer that I did what every Valorian emperor before me has done for 12,000 years. I maintained the empire. I kept order across the galaxy. If that is now considered a crime, then every emperor in our history is guilty. That is correct, the magistrate replied. And if those emperors were alive, they would stand here beside you. But they are not. You are. The galaxy has changed, Emperor. The age of empires built on slavery and conquest is ending. You will be the example that ensures it never returns. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witnesses from dozens of species testified about the atrocities committed by the Empire. Humans told of watching their world burn. Keltari spoke of generations born into slavery. Drax described families torn apart and sold to distant worlds. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. At the end of the trial, Jothic was found guilty on all charges. The sentence was life imprisonment, but not in a cell. Instead, he and his entire government would be sent to one of the worlds they had destroyed. They would spend the rest of their lives rebuilding it, working as laborers alongside the species they had once enslaved. It was a fitting punishment. They would experience firsthand what they had inflicted on others. As Jothic was led away, Sarah saw something in his eyes. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps understanding. He had learned the lesson that all tyrants eventually learn: power built on cruelty is fragile, and those you oppress may one day rise and destroy you. With the empire dissolved, the difficult work of building something new began. The Coalition of Free Worlds was established as a democratic galactic government. Every species, no matter how small or how recently freed, received equal representation. Every world received a vote. It was chaotic and messy and complicated, but it was fair. Humanity was offered a leadership position in the new coalition, but Sarah declined on behalf of her people. "We didn't fight to become the new masters of the galaxy," she told the assembly. "We fought so that no one would be masters and no one would be slaves. Give us our seat at the table, the same as every other species, and that's all we ask." The declaration earned humanity enormous respect. The species who had broken the empire was refusing to claim the spoils of victory. It was unprecedented in galactic history, and it set the tone for the coalition's early years. This would be a government built on cooperation, not domination. Earth began the long process of healing. 40 billion humans returned home from across the galaxy, bringing with them the knowledge and culture of 1,000 species. The scars of the Valorian bombardment were still visible. The craters where cities had stood were preserved as memorials. Massive walls were constructed around them with the names of every human who had died in the invasion. The largest memorial, in what had once been New York City, bore a simple inscription: "Never forget. Never again." Sarah Chen stood before that memorial on the 50th anniversary of the liberation. She was 123 years old now, kept alive by advanced medical technology that humans had acquired during the war. Emma stood beside her, now 98 herself, with her own children and grandchildren around her. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Emma asked her mother. "We could have destroyed the Valorian homeworlds. We could have made them pay in blood for what they did to us. Instead, we showed mercy." Sarah looked at the names carved into the wall. Billions of dead, each one a person with dreams and hopes and loved ones. "I think about that question every day," she admitted. "Part of me wanted revenge, wanted to watch their cities burn the way ours did. But if we had done that, we would have become exactly what they were. We would have proven that the only law in the universe is power, and the only justice is what the strong impose on the weak. So we chose to be better," Emma said. "We chose to break the cycle," Sarah replied. "The Valorians conquered because they had been conquered long ago. They enslaved because they had been enslaved. Someone had to be strong enough to win the war but wise enough not to continue the cycle. That's what humanity offered the galaxy. Not just freedom from the empire, but freedom from the idea that empires are inevitable." A young woman approached them, carrying a small child. "Dr. Chen, I wanted to thank you. I was born in the camps on Thoraxis 7. My mother told me stories about the uprising, about how you organized everything. Without you, I would have lived my whole life as a slave. My daughter would have been born a slave. Because of you, she'll grow up free." Sarah smiled and touched the child's cheek gently. "I didn't do it alone. Millions of humans worked for decades to make liberation possible. We all played our part. And now your daughter gets to live in a galaxy where slavery is history, not destiny. That's the real victory." The woman thanked her again and moved on. Sarah watched her go and felt the weight of years settling on her shoulders. She was tired, so tired, but satisfied. The work had been worth it. Later that day, Sarah attended a meeting of the Coalition Council. The topic was a disturbing one. Long-range scouts had detected a new empire in an adjacent galactic arm. Early reports suggested it was even larger than the Valorian Empire had been, and it was expanding rapidly toward Coalition space. "What do we know about them?" asked Ambassador Velkara of Keltar 9. The Keltari had become close allies of humanity, bonded by their shared struggle against the Empire. "Very little," replied the Coalition's chief of intelligence. "They call themselves the Hierarchy. They appear to be a militaristic society based on conquest and assimilation. Their technology is comparable to what the Valorians had, possibly more advanced in some areas. Are they a threat? Asked another ambassador. Any empire that expands through conquest is a threat to free peoples, Sarah said. But we're not the same galaxy they're entering. The Valorian Empire was complacent and rigid. The coalition is adaptive and unified. If the hierarchy comes as conquerors, they'll face something the Valorians never had to deal with. What's that? Someone asked. A galaxy that knows it can win, Sarah replied. We broke the Valorian Empire. We showed every species that resistance is possible, that tyrants can be defeated. The hierarchy might have superior technology, but they're entering a galaxy full of species who remember what they're capable of when they work together. That's a fight no empire has ever won. The coalition voted to send diplomatic envoys to the hierarchy, offering peaceful contact and trade. But they also voted to maintain strong defenses and to prepare for the possibility of conflict. The galaxy had learned from the Valorian experience. Never again would they be caught unprepared. The envoys departed toward hierarchy space carrying a simple message. We are the coalition of free worlds. We seek peace and cooperation with all peoples. But be warned. This galaxy is home to a species called humanity. They are the survivors of genocide who chose mercy over vengeance. They broke an empire that had stood for 12,000 years. They freed 40,000 worlds and built a new galactic order based on justice and equality. We welcome you as friends. But if you come as conquerors, you will learn why the galaxy calls humans the unbreakable. Choose wisely. Sarah watched the diplomatic ships depart and hoped the hierarchy would choose peace. But if they chose war, humanity and their allies would be ready. The galaxy had changed. The age of empires built on fear and slavery was over. A new age had begun, and humanity had helped build it. That night, Sarah sat in her home overlooking the memorial gardens that had been planted where Manhattan once stood. Emma joined her and they sat together in comfortable silence watching the stars. Do you think it will last? Emma asked. The peace we built? Nothing lasts forever, Sarah said. But we gave the galaxy something it never had before. We gave it hope that things can be different. That's worth fighting for. That's worth all the years we lost. Emma took her mother's hand. I wish we could have had those years back. I wish I could have grown up with you instead of in the camps. So do I, Sarah whispered. But we can't change the past. All we can do is make sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else. That's our legacy. That's what we fought for. They sat together as the sun set over Earth, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold.